Good morning, everyone. This is Danny Winborn. I'm president of the Maryland Planning Commissioners Association, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending today's workshop on housing in strong towns. I want to quickly thank our Vice President, Mr. Bill Butts, for bringing this concept idea to us, to the Executive Board. And I also want to thank Joe Griffith and Sarah Lipkins-Lars of the Maryland Department of Planning for shepherding us through the process of getting this, bringing this to fruition. I do want to let you know that we are recording this webinar, and we're going to be sending it to all registrants and placing it on the Maryland Department of Planning website. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe Griffiths so we can get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
Sure.
My name is Joe Griffiths. I am the Local Assistance and Training Manager for the Maryland Department of Planning. For those who have been to some MPCA conferences in the past few years or other workshops, I've definitely met you, and I'm glad that you're joining us here today. And some of you might be new or to an MPCA workshop, and I welcome you as well. I also want to thank the MPCA board for helping make this possible and having a vision for where the MPCA is going with its educational offerings. I want to thank Michael Baer, my colleague, who is running this session. And I also want to thank everybody who's joining for allowing me to be the warm-up act for Chuck Marone of Strong Towns. Today, we're going to be talking about the housing element models and guidelines that the Maryland Department of Planning developed in response to House Bill 1045, which was passed during the 2019 session of the Maryland legislature. I want you to be thinking about any best practices that you know in your community or in neighboring communities when it comes to developing affordable housing, implementing affordable housing policies, strategies, or supporting residents and access to affordable, high-quality housing. I'll be asking you about best practices later. And also one thing that I wanted to mention is that just yesterday, the MPCA board, or we sent out a request for recognitions to a lot of, to our MPCA membership and professional planners around the state, seeking 2-minute videos that we would like to show during the MPCA conference on November 9th, recognizing the very vital and significant work of mostly volunteer citizen planners around Maryland. Also, I want to note there will be 5 poll questions in this presentation that we will go through that the GoToWebinar platform will present to you. And these are pulled from self-assessments that have been developed as a resource for this models and guidelines. I'll talk about the self-assessments later, but the poll questions you see are examples of the kind of questions that we have developed for jurisdictions to consider and talk about when they are doing their, when they're developing their housing element. Oh, and if you are having trouble responding to the poll question, just minimize the actual, you can minimize the screen. For some reason, that allows some folks to actually answer the poll question where it might not allow you to do it otherwise. So we'll start off with a poll question.
Okay, Joe, it is up. So the first question is, does your comprehensive plan include a housing element? Yes, no, or not sure?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I cannot, since I'm looking at my PowerPoint, I cannot see the responses. So.
Yeah, Joe's not able to see that on his screen, so that's why we'll read it for him. And thanks for responding. I'm going to close it up and show the responses. 61% yes, 24% not sure, 15% no.
Okay. Thank you all for responding. And that's about the numbers I would expect. We know that housing elements or planning for housing are nothing new in Maryland, and that the majority of comprehensive plans address housing in some form. It has been what they call a permitted or permissive element for many years, but the new House bill requires it. And many jurisdictions are already doing an excellent job addressing affordable housing, but this new bill, because it is a requirement, we decided and we wanted to develop resources and guidance for jurisdictions. So let's look at that bill itself. Again, passed in the 2019 legislative session of the Maryland General Assembly. It went into effect on June 1st of this year. And it says that a housing element shall address the need for affordable housing and will include addressing workforce housing and low-income housing. Now, how are they defined? Workforce is defined, there's two forms of workforce. There is workforce ownership, which is defined as 60% to 120% of the Department of Housing and Urban Development's area median income. And then there's workforce rental, which is modified to be 50% to 120% of area median income, or AMI. And then low income households are less than 60% of area median income. And the requirements for House Bill 1045 also say the housing element may include goals, objectives, policies, plans, and standards. And we provide, and our models and guidelines provides assistance for all of these. All right, we have our next poll question.
Okay, it's up there now. Does your comp plan or other planning documents include goals and objectives for affordable workforce and low-income housing? And again, yes, no, not sure. We'll leave it open for a couple seconds. People are responding. And again, if you're having an issue with the not being able to vote, it could be the full screen mode. We'll leave it open for another 10 seconds or so. I can see people still coming in. Okay. So in this case, very well split, 36% yes, 33% not sure, and 31% no.
Thank you. And that also reflects some of the research that we have done. Many housing elements or even housing planning that currently exist in Maryland comprehensive plans will address housing. They might address housing design. They might just address quantity, but they don't always specifically address affordable housing or workforce housing. So again, these are questions that we put in our self-assessments, and they're things that jurisdictions should consider. And the research we have done is, we decided to go certain directions with our resources based on that. So thank you. I want to give an overview of our development process. We pretty much kicked it off about a year ago in September of 19 at a planning directors roundtable. We also met with planning directors in April, and we actually just had a meeting with planning directors yesterday with planning directors roundtable, during which they received a shortened version of this presentation. Internally, we conducted extensive research. We did a housing element inventory. Our regional planners looked at the comprehensive plans for all the existing comprehensive plans for all their jurisdictions, and we created an inventory based on to find out which ones had a housing element, if they addressed affordable and/or workforce housing, did they define it? What goals and strategies and objectives did they include? So that inventory has been essential in the work that came afterwards. We're not the first state either requiring a housing element or developing guidance. So we looked at other states and see what they've been doing, what we could build off, model, but also go in different directions as needed for the specifics of comprehensive planning in Maryland. We looked at common practices both within the inventory. From the inventory, what were a lot of jurisdictions, including the strategies in their comp plans, but also common practices in the affordable housing planning world, implementation, and industry. And we also conducted in-reach, particularly with our partners at the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, both on their neighborhood revitalization side, but also in their housing finance side, and they've been vital partners throughout this effort. Finally, we put together a stakeholder group. Started meeting in February of this year, and the last meeting was in July of this year. We had 4 meetings. The stakeholder group was made up of local housing representatives, other state agencies, and organizational representatives. So organizations dedicated to housing finance, affordable and senior housing development, affordable housing advocacy. And they were they provided significant input, but also feedback on the different stages of our development process. And I'm not going to read all this, but these are some of the major themes we received as part of that stakeholder input. They stressed the importance of early engagement and dialogue as key to advocating and developing affordable housing in the community. They made a strong case for the benefits of affordable housing, both from a community perspective, but also an economic perspective. They stressed that there are many existing resources already out there. The Maryland Department of Planning knows we're not the first ones addressing this. There have been decades and decades of excellent work in the area of affordable housing, and that we should build upon those resources to reinvent the wheel. Noted the importance of residential density through zoning and incentives, infrastructure availability, particularly water and sewer, and assistance with analyses and the provision of best practices and examples. And as I mentioned, I would be thinking about any best practices that you're aware of, either within your community, a neighboring community, doesn't have to be in Maryland, because that's something we're working on continuing to develop as part of our guidance. All right, now I have another poll question. Again, this one is from our self-assessments.
Third one is up now. Do you have a local department or division dedicated to housing development and needs? People are responding. Give you another 20 seconds or so. Okay, in this case, yes is 45, no is 39, and not sure is 16%.
Thank you. We know that housing is often, a local housing division department is often separate from the planning department, but housing planning, and it needs to cross both of the organizations. They need to work together, just like we work very closely with the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level on housing planning and housing development, affordable housing needs. We encourage that also at the local level, really dedicating resources, dedicating staff, that capacity is vital, but then also the internal groups, departments working together. I want to briefly touch on the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment, which is a parallel effort managed by the Maryland DHCD, which I've mentioned numerous times, and they're partnering with the National Center for Smart Growth and Enterprise Partners to evaluate housing needs for both renters and owners around the state. And they're also developing data that jurisdictions can use to target areas of needs. The needs assessment will also craft recommendations for a 10-year strategic plan. This is the general outline. They pushed back the final deliverable of the needs assessment, COVID, but we are still working closely with them, and we're excited about the deliverables from this, the actual needs assessment, because we think it's going to be something we can add to our housing models and guidelines, help with data interpretation, and provide another source for local housing planning needs. So we're looking at this from multiple angles. So I do want to just point out some of the key data findings already of the needs assessment that note the importance and need for addressing affordable housing in Maryland. There have been significant increases in renter and homeowner costs in Maryland since 2010. Households are aging. Close to half of renters, I mean, think about that, close to half of renters in the state are cost burdened. And cost burden is defined as spending 30% or more of a household income on housing costs, which then pulls away resources, income, and for how a household to spend on other needs. There's a potential loss of 10,000 income restricted units in the next decade, and there are higher home denial rates among households of color and women. So these are some of the key foundational data pieces that the Housing Needs Assessment is using to address those recommendations and look at housing needs from both a renter and homeowner perspective. But now I'm going to pivot to the actual models and guidelines we've developed. It is organized into the following sections. This is the landing page. It has an introduction, housing planning, self-assessments, housing data, housing practices, and affordable housing resources. And I'm going to go briefly over all of these. But I want to look at the big picture first and talk about how the tools we created can be utilized by different types of jurisdictions with different needs. As I mentioned earlier, many jurisdictions are already doing an excellent job of planning for affordable housing, and some are in different phases of that planning. For example, a small town that has seen little growth and does not have funding for consultants or limited funding for consultants may really lean on these resources. And I also want to note that Maryland Department of Planning staff, from our regional planners to our data analysts, are available for technical assistance, as are staff from the Department of Housing and Community Development. A city or county that has always had an element but is focused on design, or has focused on design rather than supply and demand or affordability, may be able to use some of our common practices and the resources we've developed. And then finally, jurisdictions may be seeking assistance to make the case for affordable housing during the visioning or engagement process. And we provide input that we receive from the stakeholders and other support for making that case. And that's also something we think that the results of the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment can assist with as well. The idea is that the resources we develop can hopefully be tailored to the specific needs of different communities. All right, for the housing planning section, it provides a thorough description of House Bill 1045 and describes comprehensive planning in Maryland, kind of laying the foundation for what are the requirements and how do you address them. It also includes the rationale. This goes back to that making the case, the importance of planning for housing, but also the value that affordable housing provides for your community. All right, I mentioned the self-assessments. We already answered a few questions related to them. We've developed 3 of them, and these are developed for jurisdictions to use to initiate both internal and stakeholder conversations about affordable housing. We have one on housing vision, one on housing analysis and policy, and one on implementation and regulation. Right. Next thing I want to talk about is housing data. I'm going to switch away from my PowerPoint and show the dashboard that we have developed. One second. All right, here is our dashboard. You see a map of Maryland there, and it starts off on the county geography. Here it is, Anne Arundel County. Give me 1 second here. It's not showing me the top of the screen. Oh, there we go. My apologies. All right, so it's here on Anne Arundel County. Zooming in. Give me 1 second. Okay, computer's acting a little funny this morning, folks. All right, so it starts off with Anne Arundel, and it'll down here at the bottom, it shows you some ECS data, American Community Survey data, specifically related to housing. And you'll see if you switch to another county or another geography. Now I'm picking Calvert County. The data at the bottom will immediately shift, all right, to represent that geography. Now, other geographies are available. I'm just going to keep it on county for now, but I want to show you, we also have data available at the census tract level and the place level. So you can switch to those. When it's places, it's both designated places and incorporated places. So if you pick tract, you can select any census tract in the state of Maryland, and it will update the information at the bottom to reflect ACS data for that geography that's selected. Over here on the left is what we're calling the AMI calculator. So I discussed earlier how the bill is based on area median income thresholds, percentages. So this one's showing the AMI for the Washington, Arlington, Alexandria, DC, Virginia, Maryland, HUD Metro, of which Calvert is a part of. And that is 126,000. And it'll show you that, and this is for 2020, it'll be updated each year. But then the calculator at the bottom calculates those household income ranges based on the requirements of the bill. So it'll show the workforce ownership range, which is 60 to 120% of that 126,000 AMI. It'll show you the workforce rental range, and it'll also show you the low income rental range. So hopefully this is designed to help jurisdictions planning for HB 1045 to really understand the income ranges that they need to plan for based on that law. But then it goes a step further as well. I talked about housing cost burden earlier based on 30% of household income. It takes these ranges right here and calculates what affordable monthly payments would be in the workforce ownership range, the workforce rental range, and low income. So the idea here is that you'll be planning to ensure you have enough units available within those ranges to meet affordability requirements. And you can come down here to look at selected monthly owner costs to get a sense of what those costs actually are, and gross rent of occupied units, and then you can compare those to what the ranges that are required. Now, I do need to note that you cannot be overly reliant on area median income to give a true demonstration of the affordability or the incomes in your community. For example, the Washington Metro AMI is very large. It goes into Virginia as well, and that's a very high income area. So if you do not want to look at that and say you're in a smaller municipality or a rural census tract in that income limit area, assume that 126,000 is the true median income of your households. But it is what the law is based on, so we want to make sure that's included. You come down here and look at the income and benefits to get a better sense of what the actual income is for whatever geography you have selected. All right, the charts and graphs themselves, we've chosen the ones that we believe are the most useful for housing planning. It includes both housing supply, which you'll see with a little house here, and housing demand, which you'll see with a little person. Some of them we think are kind of match both. If you hover over them, you can get pure numbers as opposed to just percentages. You can click on this and right here, and you can see the data in tabular format. You can make them smaller, you can make them bigger, whatever you like. You can also make the map smaller and larger. We've also included GIS layers. Oh, sorry. That you can lay on, or you can overlay on top. You know, for those familiar with Maryland, we have priority funding areas. We have sustainable communities, designations that would indicate the potential accessibility of more state funding to support affordable housing, sewer service areas. I mentioned earlier the importance of infrastructure, particularly water and sewer, to support greater density and affordable housing, things like opportunity zones. We also have, they're grayed out now because you have to zoom in really closely. We have specific property information that you can look at individual parcels, such as appraisal information, and even property sales, and include information on sea level rise, vulnerability as well, Maryland mortgage program target areas. So you could overlay those on the map to get a sense, you know, if you see that there's a census tract that particularly needs assistance based on what the ACS data is showing with affordable housing, you know, what are the supportive infrastructure and designations telling you that could help you with affordable housing planning for that area. All right, we also have, you can also, the data is not just available in the charts at the bottom, you can also export it in reports, tabular form, and these reports have additional ACS data that we didn't put in the charts at the bottom, because not to make it too busy. So additional demographics, economic, employment information that you can see here. Quickly do this. Well, it'll give you a PDF that you can download. Right now, it's not working. 1 second. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to move. Oh, here we go. Maybe. Okay, well, as I mentioned, I'm having a little bit of computer issues this morning, but it will bring up a PDF that you can download to help with your planning efforts. Okay, that's the dashboard. Go back to this. Okay. Okay. I think I might just stick with the PowerPoint for the rest of this so we don't have these freezes anymore. Let me just reload it. Okay, that's past where we need to be. All right, so I want to talk about the model housing element development process, which is part of the housing practices section. And I apologize, I would really like to walk you through this, but I'm worried that it would freeze again. So the model housing element development process walks the user through a potential planning effort to address affordable housing according to the requirements of HB 1045. It is intended as an outline for using the rest of the models and guidelines. So it goes from visioning through to implementation, and as you go through that portion of the web page, it directs you to other sections like the dashboard or the self-assessments or the resource table. So here's a good place to consider inserting it. So it's not a model housing element, whereas here's the document, do your document like this. It's not intended to be that. What it's intended to be is the development process. It suggests how and where to insert data from both the dashboard and develop locally. And so it describes the data that I already showed you, but it also talks about additional data, such as what was created by our own state data center, which is a portion of the Maryland Department of Planning, including as population estimates and population projections. It also includes information from other state agencies like the Department of Labor, which has excellent information on occupational projections and wage estimates. One of the key aspects of House Bill 1045 is planning for workforce housing. So it's important to know your existing workforce and what your economy is projecting, so you can make sure you plan for housing to support a workforce, and hopefully your workforce lives within your community. It also it goes on to talk about local data development, because we have great federal, great state data, but some of it really needs to be generated locally, looking at your specific residentially zoned districts, looking at the densities that they allow, and seeing what kind of capacity you have for future residential growth, and if you need to consider any potential zoning modifications to allow for more. And the Maryland Department of Planning, we discussed this yesterday in our Planning Directors Roundtable. I mentioned we're working on the next generation of our development capacity analysis, which will do just this, and which will help with housing planning as well. All right. All right, well, let's go to our fourth poll question. Michael, please.
Okay, it's on the screen. Does your housing element project project additional housing units needed for the next 20 years in your community? Thank you all for responding. You can see them coming in. We'll leave it open for another 20, 30 seconds or so. Thanks to everybody who is responding. If you're having problems, you can exit from the full screen if you're watching that way. Okay, so in this case, 40% not sure, 35% yes, and 25% no.
Okay. Thank you. And the information, the data, the suggestions included in the model housing element development process, provide resources and suggestions for doing just that. And it is a very important aspect of just housing planning in general, but also doing a needs analysis, a needs assessment as you go about updating or creating a new housing element to meet the requirements of HB 1045. All right. The housing practice section also includes descriptions of 5 common practices, which were pulled from the inventory of Maryland housing elements that I described earlier. Also, once we pulled those, we found which ones were most commonly mentioned as strategies. We took those to the stakeholder group, and they addressed them and discussed them, and they provided input, which is included on our webpage. But we welcome more input if you would like to provide any. This is also where we will include best practices, which I'll revisit in a few minutes. So one very common one that I'm sure many people are familiar with is inclusionary zoning, which is integration of low-income households into a market rate community. All right, financial incentives was probably the #1 mentioned as a strategy in the comprehensive plans of Maryland's that we reviewed. This includes anything from housing trust funds to modifying an APFO, adequate public facility ordinance to support affordable housing. An example of this would be creating an exemption for school facilities surcharge fees for senior affordable housing or affordable student housing, waiving application fees, involving publicly held lands or public acquisition of lands to support the development of affordable housing is also common as well. Partnerships, or it is vital to partner with local community development corporations that work in affordable housing to expand local capacity. Our DHCD partners are an excellent resource for learning more about community development corporations in your community. Here's just a few that are very active in Maryland communities and that we have seen mentioned as vital partners in the comp plans we reviewed. One that has been gaining more popularity recently are accessory dwelling units, which they have no subdivision of the property, and they can provide for multi-generational living options. As we saw earlier, that the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment shows an aging households. They do not by themselves guarantee the accessory unit is affordable, but they can increase supply, and increasing supply through housing supply through various means, including increased density or things like accessory dwelling units, can help drive down the cost of housing in your community. Specifically, we can talk about increased density. Density increases in areas where retail services, jobs, and public transportation ensure the success of affordable community and affordable housing. Now, I understand that increased density is not necessarily easy, and it's something that often has local resistance. But this is where you look at that early visioning process. Before you get into the discussion of increasing density, you work with your community, you get feedback from community, engage with them, and once you come to a vision and understanding that affordable housing is needed, and other, the strategies, the objectives, and the goals that come from that, might make this people more receptive to this. So that's not just something they see on the back end when a development proposal comes in. All right, preserving existing affordable housing stock. This is just as important as building new affordable housing stock. I mean, they're both needed. I mean, if you think about it, this is particularly important for your residents who are currently living in the units. They might have been living there for years and they rely on it being affordable, but they also want to rely on high quality residential housing. This is a strategy I want to note that there are distinctly different demands, pressures, needs, and strategies facing rapidly growing metro areas and small, stable towns and communities. Inclusionary zoning for a town that is not growing is probably not an appropriate strategy. It just probably won't yield the kind of numbers of units that you're looking for because you're not, there's no demand for the increased density that might come along with inclusionary zoning. However, using things like facade improvements, energy efficiency programs, providing direct property maintenance assistance to low-income or workforce homeowners to make sure they maintain their home can be vital to, maintaining and ensuring that those households within those AMI ranges have access. And tracking income restricted units is essential. Knowing if you're those that are deed restricted or restricted to incomes below a certain AMI, how long are they going to last as restricted, and being prepared, prioritizing how you can maintain them in that in those income limit areas. All right, our last poll question.
Okay, that's on the screen. Have you engaged partners, for example, local and regional community development corporations and employers, in a discussion about housing? Thanks to everybody responding. I apologize for the lag, Joe. I have to both launch the poll and unmute myself, which are in different tabs. So
that's fine. Thank you for your help.
Okay, we'll give everybody another 10 seconds or so to respond. Okay, so with this one, 48% yes, 33% no, and 20% not sure.
Okay, thank you. And as I mentioned, that's one of the most common practices, and it's also a way to amplify or increase the capacity of local jurisdictions. All this planning, all this development, all these strategies don't need to be, and are probably not best done only by an actual government staff or government or local jurisdictions department. Lean on your partners, use their expertise, and find ways you can collaborate. It's extremely important and impactful strategy. All right, we are going to try to see if one last thing to see if my computer is responding or being responsive here and cooperative. All right, we also, so the idea is that see, here's the report I was talking about. It took a while to pop up. The housing element models guidelines take you from visioning to implementation. So the last portion is a resource table that we developed in Power BI, which does not seem to want to, my computer does not seem to want to go to. Give me 1 second. I really want to show you this. That's not it. There we go. Let's see if it actually loads. So Power BI is a Microsoft product that many of you might be familiar with. All right, we'll at least be able to look at it. We'll see if it actually filters. We have a SharePoint list working in the background. We know that this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the resources available for affordable housing planning and development, but we think it's an excellent first start. We did a lot of work putting this together, and if you know of any others, we would love for you to send them to us. Let's see. You can filter it by category, and the categories are, we have federal, state, local. If you have a local resource specific to your jurisdiction or a region that you'd like to share, please send it our way. This time I'll select state. And then it also filters by resource type. And you can select multiple filters at a time. I'm sure many of you have used similar type products. So you can select by financing assessment, grants, all the way down to technical assistance. So here we'll look at, all right, so here's a list of state grants that may be used as a potential implementation measure. Right. We know this is not all of them, but there's a lot of them, from direct funding for acquisition to providing weatherization assistance programs, or weatherization assistance to perhaps legacy homeowners that are living in affordable housing that need some help to maintain their energy costs. So it has all sorts of resources there. Gives you the program name and a link to it, the description, the agency, the resource type, eligibility requirements, and any match requirements. All right. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of excellent existing resources also available. So we have some down here. HUD resources, National Low Income Housing Coalition. This is for those who are really into the data and like to work with data, the National Housing Preservation Database is great. That's where I was talking earlier about how Maryland's projecting about potential loss of 10,000 income restricted units over the next 10 years. And that if you're trying to preserve the existing affordable housing stock in your communities, you want to know and track and identify those units that may be losing their income restriction at a given time. The National Housing Preservation Database is an excellent place to find that information. And then the final one here that we included is the H&T Affordability Index, because typically the two biggest expenditures of any household are housing and transportation. So we also talked about, or we already talked about the 30% threshold for housing cost burden, but a real true sense of a housing, a household expenditures incorporates transportation, and this index includes them both. You might be able to find something that a place to live or a residential unit that falls under that 30% threshold, but if your transportation costs are extremely high, it might not, might balance out to still be a burden in the end. And so that when we were talking earlier about increased density, targeted density in areas where transportation is accessible, that's a key aspect of housing planning as well. You can't plan for housing in a vacuum. Okay, I want to show our phasing, because this is just phase one. We know there are other things we want to do here. We wanted to get something available. We first posted this models and guidelines in mid-June to respond to that June 1st effective date. So we're actively working on phase two this fall. We have some data additions to include to that add to that dashboard, including foreclosures and days on market for residential sales at the county level. And I mentioned a couple times this housing needs assessment. The housing needs assessment is developing data down to the census tract level, two indices using a variety of variables to determine housing needs for both renters and owners, again, down to the census tract level. And we're going to add that to our dashboard, which will really help with that interpretation piece of the data and take it to the next level, and really help those planning for affordable housing in the community to zoom in on, all right, this census tract, this area, it has high rental, burden, high housing needs for renters, and it provide a finer grained and a great addition to our dashboard. And then we also want to include a compare function where you can compare census tract to census tract. You can compare census tract to its county or a municipality. You can compare counties to counties. So you're not just looking at the geography that I showed you earlier in a vacuum. And then I mentioned it a few times here, and I have a question coming up after this about best practices. We definitely want to include local examples and best practices both within and without Maryland that jurisdictions can learn from. And we would add this to the housing practices section because you can talk about strategies in the abstract, but when you really see how another jurisdiction did something, it's helpful way to learn. And we're really reaching out and hoping that some of the jurisdictions that have been at the forefront of affordable housing planning over the past decades in Maryland can provide us some examples. All right, so let me try one last thing. All right. Okay, hopefully this, all right, excellent. I'm using this program called Mentimeter, which is a way for you to use your cell phones. I hope most people have their cell phones on them, that you can provide some direct input that we'll see on the screen. So if you're able to, if you're not able to, you can also enter some information in the question window, and we'll be able to record that as well. But if you go to www.menti.com and use the code 9942518, at the top, you'll see a code right there that you can, or an area to put the code in. I think it tells you to vote. I think that's what it says. It's pretty intuitive once you get there. And if you have, can provide an example of an affordable housing implementation best practice, or could even be an affordable housing planning best practice, could, maybe the visioning process or community engagement. We would love to have, you don't have to give us all the details, but point us in the right direction. It could be, if you have the jurisdiction, the program name, a contact would be awesome, and any other details. So you just type that into the text box that your cell phone will show on the Mentimeter site, submit it, and then it'll show up on this screen. At least that's how it's supposed to work. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Again, this could be a specific mixed use, inclusionary, inclusive zone community. It could be put together a specific housing stakeholder group that addresses these issues in your community, from planning to implementation. It could be a housing trust fund. It could be other fee waivers, energy efficiency programs, how you've addressed increased residential density in your community. Just a few examples.
Hey Joe, while we give people some time, that we did get a question.
Okay, yeah, I can work on a question while people are thinking about this.
Okay, it's from a Quasi. It's all the details in this housing element are usually undertaken by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Should this be a contribution of housing and community development to the housing element of the comprehensive plan?
Absolutely, that's a good question. That's just like as I talked about how we partnered closely with the Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development in creating this. I mean, this is a cross-departmental effort for planning, developing a housing element in your community. The planning department, is ultimately going to be responsible for the comprehensive plan, but the best elements are going to include close collaboration, not just with your jurisdictional housing department or whatever it's, they have various names, but also those other CDCs and community development corporations. So they should play an active role from beginning to end. All right, modular housing in Carroll County, Maryland. All right, I'll look into that one. I'm not familiar with that one. Thank you. And if anybody does have any questions, please put them in the questions area, so I'll have a chance to answer it. I don't want to make sure that we're able to get to the Strong Towns presentation in time. I'm also going to keep this Mentimeter site open for at least another couple hours. If you think of something, you can always, it's going to be available. You can type something in and send it to me, and then I have this saved.
Joe, so Jenny Plummer, Welker of Harbor County, I think put one in the questions tab instead of Mentimeter.
It's okay.
Saying County Board of County Commissioners established a Housing for All task force in 2019. The task force gave its final report in July 2020 and will turn towards implementing the recommendations.
Excellent. July 2020 report. Thank you, Jenny. I will check into that. And again, once again, I want to apologize. Of course, I did a presentation on this yesterday. My computer was acting just fine, and then today it decided not to. I had a lot to show you on the more on the web page, and I encourage you to visit it. All right, looks like Carroll County is doing a lot of work in this area. Excellent, thank you. All right, we're getting some good responses now. I'd like to see that. I do really encourage everybody to visit the models and guidelines. Even if everything had gone smoothly this morning, I was not going to be able to show you everything we have on there. I think while there's some things we want to add to it, we think it's quite thorough and addresses a lot of aspects of the planning process. And we're also seeking additional feedback. There's a specific feedback form on the dashboard, and then other ways to contact me. Excellent. And even the scrolling's working. Yeah, so I mean, addressing, a blight action committee and addressing abandoned properties, that goes back to the idea that every jurisdiction has, its own unique housing needs and things that strategies it can use to both preserve and or maintain affordable housing in its community and or develop new. There's no one strategy, there's no one way either to meet the requirements of House Bill 1045 and or ensure your residents and future stakeholders and your workforce have affordable quality housing.
And Paulette Florio also added that ADUs have been added to the town code in St. Michael's.
Oh, okay. That's we're saying ADUs as an accessory dwelling units, right?
Correct.
Okay, because I used to work for Loudoun County, Virginia, and we called ADUs affordable dwelling units. It was our inclusionary zoning program, and but I know more typically it's accessory dwelling units. So that's good to know for St. Michael's. We'll look into that. All right, well, if there are any other questions, go ahead and ask them, but I know that we have a great Strong Towns presentation up next, and we can work towards transitioning to that. Again, my name is Joe Griffiths. My email is Joseph, PH at the end, .griffiths@maryland.gov. My contact information is all over our website, and many of you probably have it already. Feel free to reach out to me. We know that we lean on the expertise of others, both the state level and the local level, and organizational level, to help us improve our resources. All right, well, if there are no more questions, we can switch to our next presentation. Again, just a reminder that the Maryland Planning Commissioners Association, with whom I work closely, does have a free conference, digital conference, all day on November 9th. It's a Monday. If you have not received an invite, we've tried to get our invites out as far and wide as we can. But if you've not, you're interested in it, please let me know, and I'll get that to you. Also, both of these sessions, both the one I just did, the next session, are available for AICP CM credits if you are AICP. And finally, this will be open for a while, this Menti site, if you want to add any insight. Any more questions, Michael?
No, other than a thank you from Jenny.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all as well. I will pass it over to Chuck Marone.
Sounds great. Thank you. Nice to chat with everybody. When Ray show, yeah, okay, this is good. Everybody's got my screen. I'm assuming we're good. Welcome. It's very nice to have an opportunity to chat with all of you. I have myself been a planning commission member a couple times, right back in the 90s, I think, in early 2000s. I was a planning commission member for about 4 years, and that actually ended up with me going to grad school and starting my own planning and engineering firm. So that was a helpful experience. And then the last 3 years, actually ended my term at the beginning of this year. I was on the Planning Commission here in my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. That's where I'm coming to you from today. And I look forward to chatting and taking your questions. I've got a conversation here about a toolkit that we put together, the Local Leaders Toolkit. In the early days of this pandemic, we were inundated with people asking us, what do we do now? A lot of the stuff that we have talked about, the fragility of cities financially, the way our development pattern has created these trade-offs, these short-term and long-term trade-offs from a financial standpoint, where we benefit from the growth in the short term from a cash standpoint, but over the long term take on these enormous liabilities that make us fragile. All of a sudden, all of those things were becoming very apparent, and we were flooded with requests. What do we do? Like, how do we think about this? And of course, none of us have ever been through this before, at least not to this degree and this level of intensity. So we sat down and we put together this toolkit, a way to think about how to react not only to this crisis, but really to the current situation and the kind of transition that we're going through. I'm going to try to tailor this to my colleagues that are Planning Commission members. And please feel free. I know there's a place to add your questions. I am not going to pause as I go here and answer those, but I will take a good half hour at the end, at least, to go through and answer your questions and do the best I can to address those. I want to start this conversation the way that we kind of frame this whole conversation about local leadership, and that is to talk about what it means to be a leader. There are periods of time where we need really good managers, and there's periods of time where we need really good leaders. These are two kind of different skills. There's some overlap, yes, but I think as a genuine kind of way to think about making change and being, in a sense, out in front of that, we want to draw a distinction between what it means to be a leader and what it means to be a manager, because we're really calling on leaders across the country in our cities, towns and neighborhoods to step up and lead. Leaders have followers. Managers have subordinates. Managers are assigned people who are, work for them in an organizational chart. Leaders don't have that. Leaders are bringing us to a new place, often outside of those hierarchical charts, often outside of normal structures. And so they need to get people to follow them. That actually takes a different skill set. Leaders responsibly break rules. Managers tend to administer guidelines. And this is an important one, particularly from a planning commission standpoint, because so much of what we do is rule-based, is very focused on, a series of like sequential rules and guidelines. We have to actually have a conversation, and we're going to get into this as we go here, on how we responsibly break rules, how we kind of color outside the lines. That's the way innovation happens. Leaders encourage risk-taking. Managers tend to play it safe. Again, this is not a judgment on leaders or managers. There are times when we really want to play it safe. There's times when we don't want to take risks, when we want to manage this system very well. This is not one of them, and this is not one of those environments. We want to encourage risk-taking, strategic risk, and risk in a strong town sense, where we limit our downside but have exposure to a lot of upside. But nonetheless, we want our leaders to be taking risks. Our leaders have to sell a vision. We're going through a transition right now. What does this look like when we're done? Where are we going to? Managers tend to focus on selling projects. The vision is there. We're implementing a project to get us to the vision. Right now, we're in a situation where we actually have to define what the new vision is, what the future that we want is going to look like. And then I think, most importantly right now today, As we go through this stress, as we go through this transition, leaders see opportunities. Managers see, the potential pitfalls, the things that could go wrong. Leaders are leaning into this moment. And what we really need more than anything is to lean into this moment. The first time I heard this quote, and I'm sure it was not him who came up with it, but back in the 2008 financial crises, and then in the early days of the Obama administration, it was the president's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, who said, "You never let a good crisis go to waste." I'm sure that's a statement that's been around a long time. It feels like one that leaders grasp, but I want us to think in that mindset. Right now we have an opportunity to have a dialogue. We're being, in a sense, forced to have a dialogue about what the future of our cities looks like. We are able to assess where we're at and then see the opportunities to transition to something stronger, something better, something more resilient, something that will more resemble an enduring prosperity. The way we have organized this toolkit, and by the way, at the end here, I will give you the link to get your own copy of this. It's free on our website. We have a specific link you can go to and get a copy. The way we have set this up is to help people think through a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term way of transitioning to something new. There's an immediate set of responses. How do we deal with this right now, given the challenges we face? There's then a kind of middle area that we focus on the next 2 to 12 months. And then we look a year and beyond. What are some of the things we're trying to get to? Where's the destination we're trying to accomplish? So let's start with this first, the first 60 days. And in each of these sections, we've taken two approaches. We've outlined a way to shift your thinking, or a way to think differently about things, and then also a very specific set of actions or areas of action that we should be looking to take. So our shift in thinking, the first one here is to step up. As I said, this is now a moment for leaders. We love our managers. Our managers are very important. They keep things going for most of the time, but every now and then we need not just managers, we need leaders. We need people to step up and assume that role. Those may come from planning commission members. Planning commission members are often kind of a training ground for future leaders of the community, but planning commission members themselves have a very important role and can be leaders in their own way to affect things, move things in a different direction. We need to begin the process, and we can do this mentally right away, but over time we will start shifting things around that mental shift. We need to begin to orient our communities horizontally and not vertically. Let me pause a moment and delve into that one, because it's very important. When we look at cities, particularly after World War II, as we began this growth economy, this very kind of centralized growth economy where we would engineer and design the next iteration of the community based on the federal grant we could get, the state program we could tap into, Wall Street money that could funnel through a developer or a development into our community. What we see is that cities adopted that military model, really the U.S. military model of silos and hierarchies, but they also developed this model, this orientation of being vertical. What is the program that we can tap into? What is that capital flow that we can capture? And internally, our reward systems, our systems of praise, our systems of promotion, all were kind of based on our ability to function in that vertical environment. Who was able to secure that grant? Who was able to land that project? Who was able to get that new developer to come into town? What we need to do now, and if you've ever read anything that we've done at Strong Towns or followed us in any way, you see that we're talking about this all the time. What we need to do now is shift that orientation from vertical, what is coming from the top down, to horizontal. What are the urgent needs of the people within our communities? How do we deal with them? How do we tend to them? How do we make this place work for them? When we look at the response to coronavirus, and please, I realize we're in a political season. It's very hard to separate politics at the national level sometimes from these conversations. I do not look at this in political terms. So I'm going to say something here, and I want you to not react to it in partisan terms. When we look at our coronavirus response as a nation, it has been, I think generously, we could say, it has been clumsy. We have, everything from the CDC giving guidance early on that masks are not needed when, experts were saying, hey, there's no downside to this, there's just upside, all the way to, the way that we've handled it through, the executive branch and official channels and communication with states and what have you. When we position ourselves as local communities as the bottom of a government food chain, in other words, the lowest level of government, we become kind of victim to or part of that dysfunction, that clumsiness. When we orient ourselves horizontally around our community, what we position ourselves to do is become the highest level of advocacy for the people in our place. That's the way that we look at local government, and that's the way that we would orient ourselves. The third thing here, a shift in thinking, is be a voice of unity. And I think often, that is a very happy thing to say. Be a voice of unity. Yes, we all like that. I think it's extra important in this moment in time because of how everything is automatically polarized. How we, have developed just culturally this dysfunction in being able to talk to each other and take collective action. That we do everything we can not to go out and paper things over and pretend that differences don't matter and pretend that issues aren't important, but that we're very intentional about not dividing people in ways that are unnecessary. The words that we choose, the way that we approach things, the way that we do or do not demonize people is very important. That we, have tough conversations, lead in ways that are going to be difficult, but the hill we want to die on is not one that's been created for us by people's kind of partisan reactions to things. It's one that we want to fight over the actual things that matter in our community. And then finally, seize the moment. We do have to make changes here. We do have things we have to do, and the longer we wait, the more difficult, of course, those things will come. So we have this difficult time we're going through. How do we respond? How do we today say we want to be active in our community in responding to these struggles? We're not going to be passive and allow this to wash over us and just find out where we are. We want to take control of our own future. Well, let's get people fed and let's get people sheltered. Those are the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the most important things. Let's do this. And I'm not suggesting that local government go out and do this. I'm not suggesting that it's, it's our role to, open up City Hall and let people sleep there if they don't have food and shelter. But we can prioritize this as a community. And when we do, we will find people within our community that have this capacity, that are already focused on this, whether it is religious organizations or civic organizations, that are out there doing this. By tapping into them, by understanding what they are doing and how they are doing it, and by finding ways to support that effort, even if it's just getting the word out and letting people know that this is here, we can help get people fed and we can help get people sheltered. These are, the essentials to having a broader conversation about how we make our places work. Third, support the public health response. And again, I will go back to the word clumsy and acknowledge that our public health response has been clumsy, and I think in many ways continues to be clumsy. We can debate over, who's right or who's wrong or what theory should apply, what the projections are, what the projections aren't, what the case fatality rate is. All these things I get are important, and I understand why as a civilization we're having these debates and these conversations, but it's important as a community that we and I'm going to say this, and this may not come out specifically right, but not in kind of like a lockstep way. I'm not saying that our support for the public health response is just do everything they say. But I do think that we need to be active participants. Again, local government as the highest level of coordination. We need to be active participants in this, and we need to have the voice of the community heard by the public health response, and then also have the public health response, reflected through us throughout the community. It's important that we see ourselves as in this together. And we as people in local government can do a lot to bring that about. The fourth thing here is connect masks to economic recovery. I did a podcast back in March where I talked about why Americans would not wear masks. And this is actually back when the CDC was saying, and executives, people within the high levels of government were saying, hey, the scientist people, you don't need to wear a mask. That's really not going to benefit you. In fact, there was even a conversation about how you might accidentally infect yourself putting on and off your mask, so don't wear them. And it was very clear that if we wanted to get our local economies working, if we wanted to prevent the gutting out of our small businesses, by which, today we've lost 60% of them in this already. If we wanted to prevent this damage or limit this damage, that we needed to keep people out there. We needed to keep people working. We needed to keep people at their jobs. We needed to keep people living lives as close to normal as they can. Regardless of what you think the efficacy of masks are, there's two things that are real and very true, and I think inarguable about masks. The first one is that in terms of a intervention, there's very little downside to wearing a mask, but the potential from a virology standpoint, on the upside, is enormous. If you think of a vaccine, obviously a vaccine, the upside is enormous, but who among us is not worried about the downside, right? The idea of something being rushed through very quickly, maybe not thoroughly tested. I think we all have a little bit of apprehension. If the government came out tomorrow and said, hey, we've got vaccines for everybody, we all understand that there would be a little bit of apprehension about that. When you look at masks, masks have none of that apprehension. Some discomfort, sure. Some cultural issues, sure. But the idea of physical harm is very modest for a mask. It's very hard to experience physical harm from it. But potential upside is enormous. And so when we look at that, the second part is that the way we return to normal, the way we get as close as we can to actually having a normal life, is for people to wear masks. And so at the local level, as we talk about this, we can get bogged down in the shaming of people who don't wear masks and all the things that have kind of turned very nasty in our society around this. Or we as local leaders, again, trying to lead our community someplace else, we can not have all that discussion, but just focus on the economic impacts of wearing masks in terms of our recovery, in terms of getting people to work, in terms of moving on to the next stage. I've been telling local officials since March, we have as an organization, wear your mask, talk to people about it. And when you talk to them about it, don't mention the public health benefits at all. People will figure that out. They'll deal with that. Talk about this as a way to get the community back to work, a way to get the community going. We need to bring people in and have people who are reluctant to participate in this actually want to be part of it because they want to get the community going in the right direction. They want to help those small businesses. We need to provide people space. We are now entering back into that fall and winter season when people will be more indoors again. I feel like many of our cities figured some of this out over the summer. It is very important to people's mental health. It's very important to people's buy-in to the program, in a sense, to allow them the opportunity to get outside of their own homes. Lockdowns are very, very disruptive to us socially, to us economically. They're very difficult to withstand and sustain. We need to provide space for people to be able to be outside safely, to be able to get around, to be able to have a modicum of social interaction in ways that are very human and very important for human flourishing, but don't undermine the public health threat. And so ideas of taking space that is being underutilized today, think in terms of parking lots and underused street capacity. There's a lot of space now available for people to meet, to gather in ways that are socially distanced, that won't have an impact. These should be priorities, very important. Along with that, we need to go easy on enforcement. I was seeing again last night, police officers, video police officers gathering around a pregnant woman who had sat down on a park bench next to someone else, and threatened with arrest for, violating whatever order. We need to take the opportunity now, not to go heavy on enforcement. There's no way a police state will get us to something that we want from a public health standpoint. The way we do this, particularly at the local level, is by using those engagements with law enforcement, with other personnel, as a way to have a conversation, as a way to bridge this gap. We need to bring people on board. Locking people up, fining people, it is not going to get us the response we want. We actually have to go easy on enforcement, be generous selves, and bring people into this conversation. We need to support adaptation. And I think this is really important, particularly from a planning commission standpoint. So often our role as administering codes, as administering ordinances, as writing and preparing these types of regulations, we try to think of alternatives. We try to think our way through these processes, but we often get stuck on, here's what the law says, here's what the rule says. And I get that, I understand that. That is the role of the Plan Commission member. In this moment in time, we really have to be asking some different questions about adaptation. Our small businesses are struggling, and there really is very few things that we can do at the local level to really fix that, to really proactively go in and solve those problems for people. The wearing a mask, getting people out, getting things going again is all going to be supportive of that. But what we're finding and what we're seeing is that the small businesses that are doing okay are the ones that have figured out how to adapt. We need to not be obstacles to that adaptation. And in fact, I'm going to look at the next one, which says collect data. As cities, as communities, what we can do more than anything else is to go out and ask, what can we do to help you adapt? What are the things that you need? And let me give you a concrete example. We had cities who were out calling their businesses and stopping in and saying, hey, we know these are tough times. What do you need? And the word was, we need places that we can put patrons to be outside. We need to use the sidewalk for display some of our stuff. We need to use some of these parking spaces for seating. And the city's code didn't allow that. Instead of rejecting that or saying, here's our process for an ordinance amendment and what have you, supporting adaptation is, first of all, going out and identifying that, collecting that data, and then saying, okay, how do we accommodate this? And maybe we suspend something for 90 days while we work on a code, but allow people to try it out. Maybe we create an area where people can go try these things out, and then we learn from them and try to create a code based off of that. We have to lean into the idea that small businesses need to adapt right now. They need to adapt and change, and we can't be the obstacles for that. We have to actually be a support system for that. And then finally, we need to have an efficacy of preserving cash. I think there is a sense, and I'm gonna go, think about small business. There's a sense that if we can just help people kind of bridge this gap, we will be able to save a bunch of businesses. In my community, we went and handed out $3,000 to every business in the core downtown. I get this response, and I get the desire to have this response. But what we've seen is that this has gone on a lot longer than maybe some people would initially have thought, or what that $3,000 payment would have implied. And what we're finding now is that the city's budget is stretched. The city's budget is tight. Tax receipts are down. property tax collection. There's a lot of places that are threatening to go into foreclosure. There's concern about cash flow for the community next year. And if the community is not in a position where we can provide, police protection, garbage protection, like the core services that a city does, the $3,000 we gave to small businesses very early on in the pandemic that bought them maybe a little bit of time, but ultimately, because of how long this is likely to stretch on, did not really change their overall fortunes, was just throwing money away. We need to resist the temptation to do that. We can support our small businesses, but the way we support them is by helping them to adapt, by not being obstacles for them to figure out how to make it in this new market environment. Once we get through the initial phase and we start to think about what comes next, there's additional shifts in thinking that we have to do. First, it's very important that we recognize that recovery is not going to mean restoration. Recovery is not going to mean that we go back to the way things were. We shouldn't look at February 2020 as the point we're aspiring to. We should actually look at a future destination, one that we can recover to that will be different, but will have the elements of prosperity that we're after. When we think of things in terms of how do we get back what we lost, we tend to double down on bad ideas. We tend to double down on kind of embedded errors in our thinking. When we actually think about recovery as taking what we have and building to something prosperous, we can make strategic decisions that are going to help us in the long term. You must work towards community self-sufficiency, fully knowing you're not going to get all the way there. None of us are going to have cities where we build our own iPads. None of us are going to have cities where we build our own automobiles, very likely. But we can all be places where we grow our own food, as an example. Early on in this pandemic, we saw the toilet paper shortage. But as things have gone on, we have seen other shortages. If you've been to a grocery store, particularly here in central Minnesota, where we grow a lot of food and we have a very active place, the store shelves are hit and miss all the time. Those are supply chain breakdowns. Our food typically goes through 23 different hands or 23 different transitions before it gets to us. It's often, grown in one place, processed in another place, packaged in another place. When we look at these very long food or supply chains, what we understand is that our food supply is very, very fragile. Another thing that we can recognize here is that all of that cost, all those transactions, all of that value add along the way is something that we can do locally. What we see with local food, even before the pandemic, is that with local food, we can actually grow it here. We can employ people doing it. We can create good jobs. And at the end of the day, we wind up with food that is competitively priced to the stuff we get and often tastes far better. So we can live a higher quality, more prosperous life while building our local resiliency. Food is a place to start. It's actually an easy place to start because the economics are in our favor at the local level, but expanding beyond food to other essential services, to the other things we need, is a way for us to build community self-sufficiency. We have long thought of our local economies in that vertical orientation as kind of cogs of efficiency in a larger macro economy. We need to start looking at it in a horizontal perspective, more in terms of self-sufficiency as opposed to macro efficiency. Finally, there's a trade-off between growth and stability, and this is a long-term core Strong Towns insight, but it really comes to bear right now today. It is very easy to experience growth, whether that is growth in your business, growth in your organization, growth in your community, if you're willing to sacrifice your long-term sustainability, your long-term stability. I gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today is the old Popeye Wimpy conversation. And we all understand the kind of humor in that, but also the insight in that. If we're willing to take on lots of debt today, if we're willing to take on lots of liability and commitment today, we can grow very quickly, and that growth will solve some problems, but it's going to leave us unstable in the future. Part of the reaction that we've had today and part of the distress that we've experienced as a country is that our cities are very fragile. They do lack that stability today. We need to start building stability back into our systems. At the local level, this will mean giving up some opportunities for growth, where those opportunities for growth actually don't pay off in the long run, where they actually make us poorer and less self-sufficient and less financially productive. So midterm responses, what are some of the things that we're out there doing? First of all, to the extent that we have home occupation regulations, they are now silly, right? They are now ridiculous. We wake up one day and everybody has got a home occupation. Everybody's working from home. And so we have basically just ignored these rules because they're silly. They don't make sense. Let's repeal them. Let's get rid of them because they never did make sense in the first place. Let's allow people to use their homes also to work. And let's make that an easy thing to do. Along with that, we can take the next step then and legalize neighborhood essential services. It's talking about, putting a gas station in your neighborhood or a rendering plant or something that is not neighborhood compatible. But the idea of a neighborhood being a place where, within walking distance of my house, I can access and get lots of things that I need for my daily life. We have, mistakenly made these things illegal in most of our places. This is an opportunity now service that people need and allow people to start those businesses, respond to this hardship in unique ways by legalizing those kind of things. When we look at our own, our own codes and our own responses as Planning Commission members, these things tend to freak us out a little bit. But if we go back and we look at our neighborhoods, if we study them historically, if we go through and understand how they functioned, we will see that what we as planners often call mixed use development, our ancestors, and I say that in the broadest sense of the term, our ancestors would have just called neighborhood development. They would have just called it building a city. We need to legalize these things again. The corner grocer, the coffee shop, the bodega, the person who wants to cut hair, the person who wants to have an accountant's office. All of these things are compatible with neighborhood life, and we need to allow them to exist. We need to kickstart entrepreneurs. It's important to understand the difference between an entrepreneur and an investor. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who does not understand they can fail. They have an idea, they have a passion, they have something they want to do that they think will be of service to other people, that other people will actually pay them for and they can make a profit doing. But most of them will fail. Most of them will come to ruin with that idea. The best entrepreneurs try again, try again, try again. But an investor is someone who's very different. An investor has capital, has money that they want to earn a return on. And they want that return to either be very high to negate the risk that they're taking, or they want the return to be very stable and predictable, and will accept a lower rate of return for that stability. That is a very different mindset than the entrepreneur. Our communities need entrepreneurs, but particularly now where we need this innovation, we need new ideas, we need new approaches, we need entrepreneurs. But we have created a high bar to entrepreneurship in our country. This picture right here is from Muskegon, Michigan. In Muskegon, Michigan, they had a lot of population loss. Deindustrialization cost them tens of thousands of people, and their city shrunk in size. And their core downtown had a lot of vacant buildings. When they looked at it, they had a lot of people in their city who were unemployed, underemployed, who had ideas. But when they tried to connect those people to the vacant spots they had, what they found is that the bar of entry was too high. To get into those businesses, you had to do things like make the bathrooms ADA compliant, put in sprinkler systems, bring things up to code, all things that are important and all things that are good, but all things that are, first of all, outside of the entrepreneur's passion and expertise. And second of all, it takes a lot of capital in order to accomplish, which, our entrepreneurs are just starting out fresh. And so what Muskegon did to respond to this is they went out and bought a bunch of storage sheds. They filled in a gap in their streetscape with them. You can see they painted them up and made them a little funky, and invited startup entrepreneurs to come in and open up their businesses in these places. They charge very cheap rent. They don't make you sign long-term leases. You may pay $80, $100 a month to be in one of these places. But the idea is now you have a space where you can get started. You can try your idea. You can see if you can be of service to your neighbors and make a living, make a profit being able to do that. In Muskegon, Michigan today, the downtown is full. The shops are bursting. The last time I was there, all those empty storefronts are now full. And a lot of that energy, a lot of those people came from people who started in these storage sheds, figured out proof of concept, figured out how to run their business, figured out how to make it work. And they were able to take the next step up the ladder into one of those core downtown spaces. We need to legalize housing adaptations. Again, going back to this, we're not going to be able to go out and fix every problem, but we can make adapting much easier. We have to recognize that there are a whole lot of people that are facing foreclosure right now, that are having difficulty making their mortgage, having difficult paying their rent, having difficult time staying in the homes that they have. We also have, on the other hand, a whole lot of people that need housing, like desperately need a place to stay, because they're getting kicked out of the place they are, because they don't have a home, because they have lost their job or their income has been reduced. When we can look at these two people and let our compassion run ahead of our kind of rote adherence to regulation, what we will see is that this whole conversation about what is a single family house, how does this work, how do we zone things, what is allowable in a neighborhood becomes very silly. We need to allow the person who has a single family home to create the accessory apartment, to take their house and convert it into a duplex, to rent out that, spare space or that second bedroom or that, granny flat in the basement to someone as another family who could live there. If we go back in history and look at the history of neighborhoods in this country, what we'll see is that that's a very common thing to do. You go back 100 years ago in our cities, and if someone, the breadwinner in the family, passed away, instead of being destitute, instead of being on the street, sometimes the remaining members of the family would say, you know what, we're going to take that bedroom that we have, the spare room, and we're going to start a bed and breakfast. And we'll put a little sign out front, and people will show up at night, and we'll let them stay in that room, and we'll give them a little bit to eat at the end of the day and send them on their way. That allowed them a little bit of income. It didn't allow them to live like kings, but it maybe helped them stay in their place and forestall, deeper hardship, because they were able to take the resources they had and make something out of them. When we are overly restrictive on housing adaptations, when we say you can't adapt, you can't change, you're a single family home now, you will always be a single family home, what we do is we rob our families, we rob our community of options. And we need to put options on the table now today. We need to actually expand what people can do. Now, let's be clear, I'm oriented horizontally, not vertically. My goal here is not to get the Wall Street backed housing developer to come in and buy up a single family home and put a 5-story apartment building in. The idea is to allow the people that are there the flexibility and the option to stay there, and to have their actions result in stability and more wealth being created within our communities, while also helping us deal with the issue of housing affordability and people who are struggling to find housing. Let's make some quick and lean investments in biking and walking. I mentioned in the first section, creating space for people. When we look out today, we see driving is down, parking demand is down. All of this, space that we have devoted to the moving and storage of vehicles is no longer needed for that purpose. And this is a bizarre amount of space, even in good economic times. We can go out today and recapture some of that space, stuff that we probably should have done a year ago or 5 years ago or what have you. But we can do it today when it's obvious that this stuff would be put to better use by having biking, by having walking. These are things that can be done with paint, can be done with cones, can be done with straw bales. Doesn't even have to be permanent right off the bat. But we can go out and make some of these shifts and some of these changes, and we will be astounded by how people respond positively to this. Along those lines, let's just do it finally. If you have not ended your parking requirements, just do it. This is something that we've talked about for more than a decade here at Strong Towns. The idea that parking is an anti-place. If a place is in a community about building wealth and stability and prosperity, parking is the anti-place. It's something that costs you enormous money as a community to provide, but provides you with no tax base, no transaction, no wealth. And so, parking is, at the end of the day, a luxury, an amenity. And when we think about it like that, we have a different understanding and a different approach to it. The idea that the city should be, requiring or demanding that for anyone to start a business, for anyone to build a home, for anyone to make successful use of their place, that they need to provide an amenity to everybody else in the community is backward in good times. In struggling times, it is shooting yourself in the foot twice. Let's start growing our own food. I talked about that earlier. It's kind of the initial step we can take towards resiliency. Every community in the country can start on this process and actually see the results of it. It's a very powerful way for communities to start to build a culture of local resilience and self-sufficiency. Thicken our civic infrastructure. I'm gonna go back to the original statement I said about get people fed and get people shelter. One of the things that we have seen, and you also get this if you read a book like Alienated America by Tim Carney, is that the communities that have the deepest civic infrastructure are the ones that have flourished the most, not only within this crisis, but really within the recent period of turmoil and stress coming out of the 2008 economic crisis up until the current economic dilemmas we find ourselves in. These are places that have a social safety net within the community, that have networks of people working on self-sufficiency within the community. These are places with a lot of depth. I'm going to give you a little bit of Tim Carney's Alienated America. And again, I'm going to ask you if you tend to have partisan reactions to things, to give me a little bit of leash here, because I'm going to point out some things. And I don't mean these in partisan ways. I really mean these in nonpartisan kind of, just broadly American terms. How do we, in de Tocqueville's sense, build this this thick carpet of civic life within America? One of the things that Tim Carney went to look at when he wrote Alienated America was in Republican areas, so areas that vote Republican reliably, what were the places that went for Donald Trump in the primaries leading up to the 2016 election? And what were the places that did not vote for Donald Trump, voted for someone else? And what he found, and he found this, from a data standpoint, pretty convincingly, and then he went to these places and actually spent time in them and developed kind of the empirical evidence to go along with that. It was that the places that had the deepest civic infrastructure also tended to not vote for the current president in the primaries, when these were Republican voters looking at different Republicans. So this was not a Democrat Republican thing. These are just Republicans. The places where there was a lack of civic infrastructure, where church attendance was low, where membership in societies were low, where there wasn't the sense, the kind of infrastructure of belonging to something larger than yourself. These places tended to vote for the current president in the Republican primary. And the conclusion of this book was that, when you go to one city and there's a play at the school, and it's elementary school kids, but people show up from all over, even when they don't have kids there. When there's a high school football game and the stadium is packed, and it's people in the stadium who just love the community and are not really have kids specifically or grandkids or anyone who go to the school, but are just there because that's what you do on a Friday night. These are places that tend to help each other out, tend to support each other just organically through times of difficulty and hardship. The places where you don't have that, and that really is the manifestation of all the stuff underneath, where you don't have that civic infrastructure, where you don't have that connectedness, where you don't have kind of those underlying systems. Those are the places that are more fragile. Those are the places that have the difficulty, the hardship, and as Carney points out, have higher levels of opioid addiction, higher levels of suicide, higher levels of reported depression. These are where people feel isolated and alone. At local government, we can't solve this problem necessarily, but what we can do is we can recognize the problem and become partners with people who can work on it with us. We can support them. I'll give you an example here in my hometown, because we struggle with this. I don't think as much as some places, but we do struggle with this. When I was on the Plan Commission, we had someone come in and wanted to create I can't remember what they called it exactly. They had a technical term, but it was basically a place for people who were recovering from alcohol addiction. And it was focused largely on men who, for whatever reason, did not have a place to live, needed a place to live, and were recovering, trying to become sober and recover from alcohol addiction. If you think about this group as a demographic, probably, one of the least sympathetic groups, I think, in a society, men who are drunks, who, maybe are belligerent or what have you. But this group here had said, you know what? If we're going to fix some of these broader problems, we need to find a place for these people, because they're working on things. They're trying to become, they're trying to deal with their addictions. They're trying to deal with stuff. Well, the problem was nobody wanted this in their neighborhood. Nobody wanted this in their place. And it was very easy for the city to find all kinds of reasons why, well, this technically isn't allowed in our code. And, we don't really allow this kind of home. And I was very proud, because the Plan Commission that I was on looked at this and identified this and said, this is an important thing for us to do within our city. And we found a way to get it approved. We found a way to get it done. Did this solve every problem? No, but this is part of, in a sense, a tapestry of civic infrastructure that we can start to build and start to foster and start to create that will actually help us solve problems that we're struggling with in our place. Reorienting our bureaucracies, again, getting back to this vertical versus horizontal. Let me just put this in the starkest terms possible. If you have someone on your staff whose job is to write grants, put that person to work going out and trying to observe and understand where people in the community are struggling to make use of the city as it's been built. Get them out of the grant writing business, get them out of chasing money, get them out of doing that kind of thing, and actually put them to work understanding the urgent needs of people in our place. If we can start to do that within our bureaucracy, if we can start to focus on that, we can make tremendous changes. We will see a huge number of investment opportunities for us that are small, that are low risk, but that are high returning financially, and also correlate very strongly to quality of life for people. In my community right now, the big project that we're working on is a children's museum. Children's museum sounds like a great idea, right? It sounds like part of that civic infrastructure. Yet the reason why we're working on a children's museum is not because there's a huge outcry for a children's museum. It's not because they're, the high unemployment we have in our city, the difficulty we're having, with opioids and with addiction. All these things will be solved by a children's museum. Yet a children's museum is taking up an inordinate amount of our time, our council meetings, our city staff time, all of that. Why? Well, the reason is because there's a grant program at the state that will pay for a children's museum. We have tended to do transportation projects and infrastructure projects and what have you, because that's where the money is, that's where the flows are. And so again, getting back to the idea of if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. When we orient vertically, we interpret every problem in our community in terms of what the flow of capital coming in can do. If we instead focus on the struggles and the difficulties that people in our community are having and focus and interpret those, we will find places sometimes where that capital flow ends up. But at the very end of the day, we will be directing our energies towards those actual problems, which is the important part. And then we need to change how we measure success. At the local level, we tend to measure things like issued, number of vehicle miles traveled. We tend to measure transactions, the quantity of things that we correlate to good. We actually need to measure success. Things like, how many of our kids what's our graduation rate from school? That is not something that is easy to fix, but it's something that leads to a deeper set of questions about, the way our community is structured and what we are doing. There's a group in Pensacola, Florida, that has actually developed a dashboard of metrics for their community. I included the link in the toolkit so you can go and look at that and see if any of those apply to you and if there's any of those that you can adopt or see how they've approached it so you can come up with your own. In this stage, we also need to talk about preparing for federal state assistance. And I put assistance in the kind of annoying air quotes here. If you remember back to 2009, 2010, we had stimulus bills come forward and we got the notion of a shovel-ready project. We were very eager to fund shovel-ready projects. If a project was shovel-ready, it would get up to the top of the priority list for funding. What is a shovel-ready project? A shovel-ready project is a project that has been birthed by the bureaucracy of the city. It has gone through all the processes that you need to put a project together, all the input and the public hearings and the planning and the preparation of plans. It's gone through all of that work, which it takes a long, long, long time. And it got to the end of the process. And when the final decision had to be made on whether this was a project worthy of the money that was going to have to be committed to it, whoever would make that decision, likely elected officials, said, well, we're not doing that. Like, we can't justify that project for that amount of money. Like, this project doesn't make sense. Like, we would not do this project with our money. So what a shovel-ready project is they tend to be the worst projects in the group. They tend to be the projects that really don't have as much local value as other things. Yet these are the projects that, when the flood of capital comes flowing through, again, in the vertical orientation in our communities, get funded the quickest. We are going to get this money at some point. At some point, there will be a stimulus bill directed to local communities. It will include a bunch of money for infrastructure. It will emphasize shovel-ready projects. I want you, instead of funding the worst projects in your community just because you want the money, to actually think about the type of project that would most benefit you. In my book, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution, we looked at neighborhoods that were the most financially productive. And I've translated that now into the type of project that, while there are going to be exceptions around the margins, if you're just spitballing it, if you're just like, we're getting the money now, we got to make a decision what type of project to do, these are the types of projects that are going to have the greatest likelihood of paying off for you. When you can prioritize maintenance over new capacity, you're going to be doing better financially. When you can prioritize below ground infrastructure over above ground infrastructure, again, your return on investment for that is going to be much higher. And then third, if you can direct your investments to neighborhoods that are more than 75 years old, as opposed to neighborhoods that have been built after World War II, what you will find is that those neighborhoods have the adaptability, the flexibility, they're structured in such a way that the investment that you're making there can be realized in increased tax base and increased community wealth. When you are thinking about a project for infrastructure stimulus money, if you can do a maintenance project, fixing stuff that is below ground in old neighborhoods, you will be positioning your community in the strongest way. If you do the opposite, build new capacity above ground in new neighborhoods, you are going to be creating huge amounts of liabilities for yourself in the future. So when we get this stuff, going, when we've made these mental shifts, and then we start to think about what comes next, where do we go? What we really go back to is just the core Strong Towns principles. At Strong Towns, we rely on little bets, not transformative projects. We don't go in and try to change everything overnight. We iterate and we co-create. We try little things over and over, and we build on success. We emphasize resiliency, particularly local resiliency, not simple efficiency. An efficient economy is one that tends to not build wealth, tends to actually extract wealth from our communities. When we can build local resiliency, we can actually create places that are more prosperous, more stable. When we design our places to adapt to feedback, what we're doing is we're accepting good and bad, and we're learning from those mistakes. We're allowing our systems to adapt and change and be functional over time. We use bottom-up action, not top-down systems. Again, this goes back to the vertical versus horizontal orientation. When we can focus our efforts on understanding the urgent struggles of people in our community, the struggles that people have living in the place as it is currently built, and we can respond to those with little bets designed to adapt to feedback iteratively over and over, we make very modest investments that have huge financial returns and huge returns in terms of prosperity. Conduct as much of life as possible as a personal scale. Again, just as a broader observation, when we have places that are oriented towards people, we tend to see higher financial returns. When we build places oriented around the automobile, they spread out, the cost of providing service goes way up, and the tax base proportionally goes way down. And we find cities over the long term to be struggling into those scenarios. And then always do the math. We emphasize the finances here. We do that because they should drive our outcomes. If we want prosperous places, they have to be places that endure, and you're not going to endure if you go bankrupt. You're not going to endure if you become insolvent. And so when we do the math, what we find is that our investment opportunities change dramatically from what we maybe are used to culturally. So we focus on our downtown and an ecosystem of neighborhoods, our downtown and the ecosystem around it. A lot of places now look at their downtown as like a museum piece, like let's have a really nice place we can drive to a parking ramp and enjoy. And the reality is that downtowns are meant to be part of an ecosystem of surrounding neighborhoods. That's your focus point. And when you can focus on that, as opposed to just the downtown, what you see is that it becomes a positive feedback loop that makes everything wealthier and more productive and more prosperous. From a plan commission standpoint, when we focus on use, we're actually going to get negative outcomes. When we focus on neighborhood compatibility in terms of our regulations and our regulatory approach, we can build places that have that adaptability and that flexibility. It doesn't matter to me if someone is an electrician or someone is, a painter. Why does our zoning code obsess over the difference between the two? What it does matter to me is how the building looks, how it orients in relationship to its neighbors, how it is a good neighbor in that neighborhood. We need to shift from use-based codes to form-based codes and have our regulatory approval processes be more nimble and more focused on that neighborhood compatibility. Focus on expanding housing opportunities. We should look at for every opportunity we can to allow people flexibility within that neighborhood framework. At Strong Towns, we talk about allowing every block to be able to iterate to the next level of intensity. We would protect blocks from large leaps. Again, the idea of single family homes going to 3-story, 4-story apartment buildings overnight doesn't make a lot of sense. But every neighborhood, everywhere that is a single family home neighborhood should be able to expand and grow and evolve into a neighborhood of duplexes. because that's how we actually make better use of the stuff we have. Focus on transportation as a means, not an end. Again, this gets back to the hammer nail thing. We tend to define all of our problems in terms of these capital flows. The biggest capital flow vertically is in transportation. And so all of a sudden, every problem we have, every economic development problem, every social problem becomes a transportation project. We need to fix that. Transportation should solve our problems, but we got to start with our problem, not with the transportation money. Focus on economic development with a gardening mentality. If we can, bring in one business with 50 jobs, that's not as nearly as helpful for us as taking 50 businesses we have and growing one job apiece. There's a great group with the Kauffman Foundation called Economic Gardening. We've done a number of podcasts and stuff with them. If you just type Strong Towns Economic Gardening, you will get that. If you just go to the website, Economic Gardening, you'll see an entire approach that is just genius, creating many, many jobs with much smaller levels of investment. Let's leverage our public spaces. We like to tell people if you have to drive to your public space, you've done it wrong. The idea is to make these organic within our neighborhoods so that they actually radiate wealth to the space around them. Focus on our people. Again, reorient ourselves so that we're focusing on the urgent struggles of people. They will point the way to the best investments we can make. And then let's reduce our debt and our liability. There are all kinds of theories of economics and theories of governance at the macro level that get mixed up with our conversation at the local level. There is no doubt that it will help the macro economy if cities take on lots of debt and lots of liabilities. But when we do that, what we are doing is we are denying future generations options. Our cities need options. They need to be able to respond to hardship in novel ways. And so reducing our debts, reducing our overall liabilities is a very important strategy. We have created the Strong Towns community. You can get there at community.strongtowns.org. There you will find people discussing how to build a strong town, how to implement Strong Towns ideas in their place. We welcome you to join that conversation. There's absolutely no cost to doing that. We also, in the early days of the pandemic, launched, in response to the request, we launched the Strong Towns Academy. The Strong Towns Academy is an online learning platform. You can get there at academy.strongtowns.org. We created a Strong Towns 101 course that is free. The idea of this course is not only to help yourself, but as you're building a culture of change in your community, being able to share this very quick and easy course with other people, allow them to take it and build a common understanding of how to move ahead. If you're interested in delving deeper, there's a whole long list of courses that we are in the process of preparing. Some of these are nearly done. Some of them are just getting started. Within the next few months, we will have all of these completed. These courses are designed to walk you through how to implement Strong Towns ideas and build a plan for your community. And then finally, if you are interested in getting a copy of this toolkit, you can get that at strongtowns.org-toolkit. We will send that out to you, and hope you can use it, pass it around, make good use of these ideas. I'm going to pause there. And first of all, just say thank you. Thank you for sticking with me. I see we might have even gained a couple people in terms of numbers. I don't know if someone's going to come on with me now and go through a Q&A, or if I'm going to do this on my own, but I'm happy to do it either way. You guys let me know.
Thank you, Chuck. This is Joe Griffiths, Maryland Department of Planning again. My colleague Michael Bear is going to handle the questions, but I want to remind folks we do have a few questions in the question tab, but please enter any questions that you have in the question tab, and then Michael Bear will read those to Chuck.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great, Joe. And thanks,
Welcome.
Chuck. Yeah, so we have a good number of questions here, and I guess we're going to go till about 11:30. Is that right, Chuck?
Well, it will be 10:30 my time, but 11:30 your time. That will be great.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll go till we run out of questions. How about that?
That'd be delightful. I'm good.
Not beyond 10:30 your time. Okay. So we did get a question from Jada Stuckert, who asked, are you suggesting that waiving home occupation restrictions legalizing neighborhood essential services, and legalizing housing adaptations should be waived indefinitely or temporarily until COVID-19 goes away?
I would do all those things permanently. I think, for your community, you obviously have to think strategically. Some places are not ready to do that permanently. I would add the parking restrictions into that list. Some places aren't ready to make those moves permanent. I would use this as an opportunity to say, hey, these are ideas we've been pondering. These are ideas that, people are doing across the country and seeing good results from. Let's try this out here. Let's try it out. If we can't do it permanently, let's at least try it out in a limited way and see what, the negative results might be, with an eye towards someday making it permanent. When I use the statement, don't let a crisis go to waste, there's a lot of very common sense, logical things that we should be doing in our communities to allow them to adapt and change and become stronger. These things are going to help us out in the short term, going to help us out today, but they'll also help us out long term. And so I think understanding that and being able to kind of work in both those dimensions is really important to the process of making change and the process of bringing people along with you on that journey. If it's too scary for people, do it temporarily. If they're willing to do it permanently, do it permanently. I think all cities should be doing this, regardless of the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Here are a couple of comments. I'm not sure there's a question here, but maybe you can respond to these. They're both
Sure.
from Diane Walbrecker. These are really important concepts, and I'm going to steal them for teaching recovery from disaster, local community roles. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I want to
let me respond to that first.
Okay.
Just as a general statement, everything that we do at Strong Towns, we community commons license, and so I know the idea of stealing something is not literal, but I want everyone to know that all of our work is available for everybody to use, to copy, to pass around, to adapt. I tell people, if you like something we wrote, go ahead and copy it and paste it into your document and pretend you wrote it. That's fine with us. So steal away, please.
Okay. I will see if she responds, if she wants to that. But she also said, ask people to think about hazard mitigation opportunities. And then she also she works for FEMA in Emmitsburg, so all of our stuff is going public domain too.
Yeah, the conversation around hazard mitigation is an interesting one, and let me at the risk of opening up a big can of worms, let me address it like this. I was in New Orleans in 2007 or 8, and as an engineer, I had the opportunity to tour the massive dike installations and all the stuff they were doing to prevent another Hurricane Katrina disaster in New Orleans and the flooding that ensued. And you look at it, and I want to say this one series of things was like $20 billion. I mean, it was astounding. It was just mind-boggling how much money was been spent and how much effort had gone into this. And from an engineering standpoint, I'm a civil engineer. From an engineering standpoint, this was all very impressive. This was all very interesting to see, and it was very impressive. I was reminded, though, as I went through this, how the original dikes, the ones that failed, were also very impressive when they were built. They were built with federal money. They were very impressive. They were hazard mitigation, but they weren't properly maintained. They weren't taken care of. And they weren't taken care of, and this stuff won't be taken care of either, because it's out of proportion to the community. New Orleans doesn't have the money to spend $20 billion on this stuff. and there's mechanical locks, and there's all this stuff. It's very difficult for me to see this being taken care of over the long term in the way that it would need to be to avoid another disaster. Sure, in the short term, in our lifetimes, probably we're not going to see a repeat of the flooding because they've dealt with this. But over the long term, what are the impacts? We see time and time and time again that what this does is gives us a false sense of security. That ultimately, as fallible humans, we tend to fall into these traps. I'm reminded of a bridge here in Minnesota. There's a state park where there's a little suspension bridge that goes over the river. And it's just for people to walk on. You can't drive on it. You can't even, take a snowmobile or an ATV or anything on it, or you maybe could bike over it, but I don't think so. There's, space in the slats. It's people walking on the trail. There was a succession of floods that wiped out this bridge, and it wiped it out, and then they rebuilt the bridge, and then 5 years later, what have you, within a reasonable period of time, a flood came through again and wiped it out again. And the next time they went out to rebuild it, they basically said, this sucker's not coming down ever again. I want to say they spent $1.5 million on that last bridge, concrete abutments, all this stuff to mitigate this so this bridge wouldn't come down again. The original bridge, I want to say, cost $150,000. And we looked at it and we said, let's say those are the numbers. I think that's a reasonable approximation. They could have rebuilt that bridge 10 times. Rebuilt it 10 times for the cost of building it once to permanently last. How many times would it, fall down over the next 100 years? I don't know. I mean, we had a little run there, but statistically, it's not going to be every 5 years. And so the question really comes in, when we think about New Orleans, when we think about this bridge, when we think about hazard mitigation in general, oftentimes we can have access to these big capital flows, and we respond to them, by building a bigger hammer. When a lot of times what we really should be doing is using that money or using those resources to make our cities more adaptable, more flexible, more responsive, more resilient. I think this is an American cultural thing that we can even see in the virus and the pandemic. The American response, the response that we kind of all culturally understand, is that what we need is we really need a vaccine. We really need something that will come in and that we can take or be injected with or what have you, that will overcome this virus. If you go to other parts of the world, and I'm familiar with Europe in terms of its response, but I have been led to believe that this is true in other parts of the world. The European response to public health is less about a vaccine, although a vaccine will be helpful, and certainly they would not deny that. But the emphasis of the response is on essentially preparing your body to be strong, resilient, and able to overcome an infection. How do we prepare? The term that they use is, how do we prepare the terrain? How do we prepare the terrain of your body? And I think that mental shift is one that, as a broader culture, we have a hard time making. But as local officials working in a place, if we can think of our communities as places that we need to be good terrain, solid terrain, places that can be adaptable, flexible, and overcome whatever's handed to them, we won't respond to the immediate urgency with some big hammer nail kind of approach. We will respond to today by building up stuff that will allow us to respond to the next unknown, the next unknown, the next unknown beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is from Taylor Roby, who says he's a longtime fan of Strong Towns. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Many small businesses in the area I live in have adapted to utilize city sidewalks and outdoor space to survive in the pandemic. Any tips or policy ideas for these groups moving into the colder months?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we certainly aren't going to deal with that here. We can already see it's when that question first came, I had this thing pop into my head. I was in Pasadena, California, a few years ago, and we were doing this outdoor gathering. I can't remember what it was, but we were meeting at a restaurant. And you know, being from Minnesota, anything above 40 degrees is shorts and sandals weather. And we were in Pasadena, and all these people were showing up, and I was in a sport coat like this and a tie, and I was hot because it was like 65 or 66 degrees, somewhere in that range. And they had turned on the outdoor heaters because the people from Pasadena were cold. I've seen us now here in our core downtown start to deploy some of those things. Some of our businesses have come in and put those in. But I think the question, you know, is going to be, and I don't have a very clear answer, you know, what happens when we can't go inside? Or stay outside? What happens when that's not possible? One of the things that I've been struck with here is that the franchise restaurants have done really well, or they've you know, the franchise places, the big box have all actually done, you know, Target did their earnings announcement a couple months ago, and Target is a Minnesota company, and they surprised huge on the upside. I mean, like massive. What we're seeing is that these places are doing really well because they actually have the infrastructure for people to not go in the store. Target, you can, you know, call and order your stuff now. You can have it, you know, brought out to your car. They have, you know, deals with people who will deliver that stuff for you. All the franchise restaurants, whether it is the McDonald's and the Taco Bell and all that have drive-throughs, they've closed their stores. They just do the drive-through. Or whether it's the restaurants, you know, the Applebee's and that kind of thing, where they've always had the to-go kind of part, but now they've just, you know, ramped that up. So it's, you know, they're doing to-go. They all have the infrastructure of doing that. They have the mobile app. They have the, you know, the nice interactive menu online. They've been able to create all this stuff that basically gives them this like competitive advantage in the marketplace. Again, a competitive advantage that we've kind of surrounded them with the infrastructure of. When we look at those small businesses in the core of our downtown, in this environment, they're at an even greater competitive disadvantage because not only, you know, have we made our cities where people are going to drive everywhere, and so the McDonald's drive-through or the Applebee's becomes just physically an easier option, but we, you know, have restricted those spaces around our other businesses. So things like one of the things we saw early on was designated parking spots. The city actually allowing people to say, yes, this is a public parking spot, but for now, you know, these 2 spots in front of our restaurant are reserved just for takeout patrons. And so you can't park here. You know, you can park here, call the number, we'll run your stuff out, but you can't, you know, you can't park here and get and walk around or leave your vehicle here. I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning. I don't have the answers, and I don't think that we should expect our planning commission to have the answers. But the people who will have the answers are the small businesses who have to figure this out, or they're going to go away. And so I feel like our response should be to them. What are you thinking about doing? What do you want to try? And how do we be of assistance to that? How do we go talk to the fire chief to make sure he's not going to throw a fit about what you're doing? How do we go run interference with you with the, you know, the city planner or the zoning administrator so that we can, you know, get you whatever approvals we need to allow you to do this? Those are the things that we can do more so than, you know, solving this actual problem for them.
Great, thank you. Next question here is, public transportation is extremely important to the creation of affordable housing. Do you have any suggestions on how to improve public transportation in suburban communities?
Yes and no. And I'm going to maybe lean into the no. I feel like a lot of the times we have allowed ourselves to be hostage to the commuter mentality, the idea that the optimum way to organize our society is to have people living out on the edge and then commuting into the center. And then, to take that a step further, we take that as like the optimum strategy, or at least the strategy we're stuck with. And we overlay on top of that a very expensive yet ineffective public transit system. And, we often do that with the intention of building something that is compassionate, that will help the poor. I struggle with that whole conversation because every part of that narrative to me seems wrong, just seems wrong in itself. Now, I'll step back and I'll say, if you're working on this from a practical standpoint, like what do I do tomorrow to make this work? Follow Jarrett Walker, Human Transit. He's the smartest guy that I've ever seen on any of this stuff. He's got a great book, and I think he can help you out with thinking through all this stuff. For me, I try not to get bogged down in like the day-to-day transit stuff because it is a ridiculous system. If you said to me, how do we help improve transit to people in suburbs? I would say the first thing we need to do is give people more options besides living in the suburbs, because we really can't build or sustain good, reliable transit with good frequency that will actually give people a high quality of life when they live in a vastly decentralized place where their job is long distances away from where they live. And so what we need to do is actually find a way to build housing in more flexible ways, with more options, closer to where people would actually need to live, or at least in places where they can get access to their daily needs and not have to be reliant on a vehicle or a long commute or what have you just to get life's essentials. To me, that is a far more effective strategy that's going to cost a lot less and pay a lot higher returns, and actually, give people a higher quality of life than say, we'll have an extra bus route here, at some weird off-peak time that will make you spend an hour and a half on a bus route that takes someone 45 minutes to do by vehicle. So I struggle with our transit approach because to me it seems to be a bad appendage to a bad development pattern. Great transit, in my mind, is supportive of a place, and it actually draws its wealth and its value from the wealth and value created in that place. The more we make transit about commuting and an alternate, basically the poor people's way to commute, not only will our transit systems, I think, be underfunded and under capacity and not up to that, we're asking them to do the impossible. But we will also see, support for transit be and I'm going to say this in a kind way. I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but I think we will see it as something that is fringe in terms of our support. It will be something that people support as akin to supporting charity as opposed to essential infrastructure. And I think that does transit a long-term disservice.
Thanks, Chuck. We'll take a couple more before we run out of time here. And I'll mention for those in the audience that we actually did a webinar with Jarrett Walker and Jeff Speck earlier this year. That's archived on the smartgrowth.org website. If anybody has any questions, they can contact us about that. Here's a question about kind of the Maryland focus. Do you have any local ambassadors of strong towns in the Maryland area who could help to implement the many suggested improvements in your toolkit?
It's a good question. I'm going to answer it in two ways, and I don't know Maryland politics, and so I don't want to step on anyone's toes or say something out of bounds. Let me answer this in two ways. The first is on our website there is a thing we call local conversations. These are self-identified local groups that are working to advance strong towns thinking. I can't tell you the exact URL on our site right now. I think you can get to it from the homepage, but if not, if you type in Google Strong Towns Local Conversations, you will get a map, and the map will show anybody in your area, and you can get connected to those groups and get working on it. If there isn't a group in your area, there's also an opportunity to start one there. And if you start one there and inform us, we will contact everyone who is in our database. We have about 80,000 contacts in our database. We'll contact everyone that is in your region and tell them about your group. And so we can get you up and running. Beyond that, there's two groups in Maryland that I think are not only great people, but they're doing fantastic work. The first one I'll start with is the group in Old Goucher in Baltimore. Leon Pinkett is the council member there, and I hope I remember that name correctly. There's a guy named Kelly Cross that helped bring us to that neighborhood, and they are, I mean, out of hardship and out of really a difficult situation way before the pandemic, are doing just miracles. They're doing amazing work. Local community groups working in kind of a coalition with the city to make these strategic investments, these small investments, to bring back businesses and vacant buildings, to get vacant houses occupied and cleaned up. They're doing tremendous work. And so if you're interested in a very urban setting, Leon Pinkett is a council member. I knew that name was becoming more clear in my mind. And then Kelly Cross at Old Goucher is the neighborhood. I think Kelly is actually running for city council now too. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on there. Outside of a major city, Jake Day in Salisbury is, if not a hero of mine, certainly a good friend and someone I deeply admire. Jake is the mayor of Salisbury. I have chatted with him a lot and seen him, and obviously he works as part of a team there, but as a mayor, been very active in helping his city. The potential that they have, a place that I think has historically struggled, but I've watched over the last half dozen years really embrace the idea of these small incremental changes, the cumulative effect of that, the real power of building momentum in a place. I was able to visit Salisbury about a year ago and was just deeply impressed by the improvements that they've made. So, I know Jake is first of all, he's a great guy. He's a good friend. I really like him and admire him. I know he's also, a little bit of a politician at times. Maybe he's on this call. So, I wouldn't be surprised if you see his name in other places because he is one of these kind of natural leader kind of guys. If you do, he's a good guy.
Great, thanks. And thanks to everybody who submitted questions today. We won't get to all of them, but thank you for that. I guess the last one then is about this. How can planning commissioners in neighboring jurisdictions or municipalities and counties collaborate as leaders on these approaches? So I'm going to say something that, I don't want to rub people the wrong way, but I believe it's very, very hard. I think that there's a natural inclination that we have, particularly in government, to want to collaborate, to want to work with other jurisdictions, to want to, have our governments be friendly and coordinating and what have you. And I get that impulse. I understand that, and I don't think that's wrong. I think it's the correct impulse.
That being said, a lot of what we need to do in cities, a lot of what we need to do locally to get things, moving in the right direction are not collaborative. There's stuff that we do independently, actually. There's stuff that build kind of our own resilience. A lot of times when I see collaborative projects or collaborative endeavors, it almost devolves down to one of two things. One, the way we can get the bigger hammer to beat the nail is to work together. So we can pool our resources or apply for a joint grant or what have you, and that will improve our position. But we can get the bigger hammer if we just work together. The other idea is that we will sacrifice a little bit if you sacrifice a little bit. Again, I don't think this impulse is wrong, but going back to like the transit conversation, I said, is that you're trying to overcome the commuter mentality, the commuter framework by overlaying, a charity system of transit onto it. And it's almost impossible to do well. I think if you are the city of whatever, and you look and say, well, what would benefit our city is to have a really great neighborhood ecosystem that created jobs, had positive, allowed people to maybe go down to one automobile, was more walkable, was more bikeable, was more of a place, was a better place. That, in a lot of ways, runs in the antithesis of the commuter mentality, the idea that we should take our place and gut it out. Put a big highway through the middle of it, put wide lanes through the middle of it, tear down buildings and put in parking and parking garages and what have you to accommodate people who on the outside. So there's a tension there. Ultimately, at Strong Towns, and if you read our book and you follow our stuff, we will, you will see that we have identified the most fragile part of any community ecosystem as the edge. It's the part that the core tends to subsidize. The money moves in that direction from the center out to the edge. The edge is where you see buildings that are the least adaptable, the least flexible. They're the least financially productive. They cost the most to provide service to, and they provide the least amount of tax revenue per foot, per square foot, per mile. And so when we project out into the future, the places that we've seen do the most collaboration, the collaboration has ultimately ended up being an increase in subsidy from the core vital neighborhoods that are actually so important to making the community prosperous and stable, out to subsidize the stuff that is really the kind of dead end financially and the dead end in many other directions within the community. And so the question is like, how do we all work together? I think you look for those opportunities, but I think you ground yourself in your place, and that becomes, the focus. And everything else on top of that is where those, ideas of collaboration align, great. But where they don't, I would work less to force it today than what we've seen communities do really over the past number of decades.
Great. Well, with that, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe to help us close.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Joe is, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to Joe for his housing elements and guidelines discussion, and then Chuck Marone, thank you so much for amazing Strong Towns presentation today. It was amazing, and we got so much from that. And I also love your big blue mic. That was really nice. And then Michael Bayer, thanks for providing our technology so we could get this seminar done. It was really great of you to hang in there with us and help guide our discussion and keep the questions rolling and everything. So I really appreciate that. And as I said, this is being recorded and will be sent to each of the participants today. And I think we had about a high number of about 73 or 74. So this is very successful for us. And I appreciate everybody taking out time out of their busy days, their busy schedules to come and share time with us. So with that, I'd like to just maybe turn it over to Joe. Joe, are you there? There you go. Hey, you're on mute, Joe. You're on mute, Joe.
It's not unmuted, but the mic isn't working for some reason, Joe.
Oh. All right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with us, and I hope you got a lot out of this, and hopefully you can join us on November 9th for our MPCA virtual annual conference. We have a lot of things a lot of good things that we'll be discussing, so thank you, everybody. Okay.
If you can hear me, thank you.
There you go.
Hey, all right. Thanks for everybody for joining us. This was the first time MPC has ventured into a digital workshop. We think it'll help us a lot with the digital conference that we mentioned multiple times on November 9th. We appreciate it and have a great weekend.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.